I'm so broke right now I can't even afford to pay attention.
Sounds like business as usual. We're feeling a bit down on our luck this week. The Five of Pentacles is a card of being broke on our arse and staggering through a blizzard. Not an ideal situation to find ourselves in, but with the Pentacles including all questions of money, the tarot has to cover the bad times too. We're talking about those times when you're so broke that when you go to the park, the ducks are throwing bread at you. In the key to the tarot, Arthur Edward Waite says 2 mendicants in a snowstorm pass a lighted casement. Apparently mendicant is an old word for beggar, so we're talking about 2 people who've hit some seriously hard times here. We can see the tattered clothes and bare feet. There's a strong suggestion that they're homeless and they're just doing everything they can to survive. Now it's interesting that the last card showed us someone hoarding their wealth, because we're pretty much at the opposite end of the scale this time. POLLACK says the 5s illustrate conflict or loss of some kind. In terms of Pentacles, this means first of all material troubles, such as poverty or illness. We can see that one of the characters is walking along with crutches, so we've got the added emphasis on poor health here too. Now of course that's not just limited to physical health. Anyone who's been through a period of hard times financially can relate to the toll that it has on our mental health. Also, we've got the concept of spiritual poverty in this card. It can be very easy to lose faith at a time like this. That can mean straying from whatever spiritual path we're on, or it can just mean losing the faith that things will ever get better. I think this is illustrated by the way the 2 figures are passing by a church that's got 5 pentacles on the stained glass window. The light shines from within, but they're walking straight past it. Either they don't notice or they're just not interested. POLLACK goes on to say, notice that they are passing a church. Now as a place of sanctuary, the church represents rest and relief from the storm. The people, however, do not see it. There's a bit of history when it comes to the church as a place of sanctuary. Historically, churches have been seen as a place of protection for people in trouble. That could sometimes be criminals on the run. Apparently, a requirement for them being allowed to hide in a church was that they had to convert to Christianity. I'm sure there's been quite a few ne'er-do-wells who've suddenly seen the error of their ways. I imagine being chased down by an angry mob or the town guard might do wonders for bringing out the religion in people. But anyway, I think it raises the possibility of the spiritual side of things becoming somewhat obscured to us when we're going through hard times. Given the worst set of circumstances, it might be difficult to accept destitution as all part of God's plan. The Salvation Army does a lot for people in crisis, whether that's homelessness, hunger, or people just being alone. Let's not forget that loneliness is another form of poverty. I'll put a link in the description if anyone would like to donate to them.
I was once so poor I couldn't even afford to pay my electricity bill. Those were the darkest days of my life.
The Thoth card has got all manner going on. Crowley says the symbol represents 5 discs in the form of an inverted pentagram, instability in the very foundations of matter. The effect is that of an earthquake. An earthquake? Blimey, he's not messing around, is he? Anyway, as with all the 5s in the Thoth deck except for the 1s, we've got another inverted pentagram. I've talked about this before, but the Golden Dawn viewed the upside down star as representing matter presiding over spirit, so it was always taken as a sign of something sinister. He also suggests that the 5 points represent the 5 tattvas in Indian philosophy, or the 5 principles of reality. This is similar to the 5 elements we talk about in Western esotericism: fire, water, air, earth, and spirit, or what they call ether in this case. Crowley goes on to say the general effect is one of intense strain, yet the symbol implies long continued inaction. So I think he might be referring to laziness here, and I think that's something that could easily bring about a time of poverty. Lon Duquette brings us back to the idea of the upside down pentagram and how that can be seen as an affront to the natural order of things. He says if we look closely we can see that the black egg of spirit is upon the downward point of the pentagram. It is clear that the 5 of discs is pointing to the more nasty meaning of the averse pentagram, that of triumph of matter over spirit.
Guess what the Sfool's Marseille cards have done? Yep, they've added another coin. The Solabusca card has what appears to be a half-man, half-crow, hunched up and surrounded by coins that look like symbols. Maybe he's the drummer for the Birds. 3 and 7, word for word, the lover of life 7 is characteristic of Generation 3.
I think it's worth pointing out that you could legally buy all kinds of concoctions in the days of A.E.WAITE. That could easily be the inspiration for whatever the hell he's banging on about this time.
The Hermetic title for the 5 of Pentacles is Lord of Material Trouble.
So the title matches perfectly this time. Material Troubles is another perfect description of the image we see on the Waite-Smith card. The Thoth card is just called Worry, so we're definitely in the same ballpark across the board. Money troubles are easily one of the most common things we find ourselves worrying about. I talked earlier about how financial difficulties can have a strain on our mental health. It's been proven that long-term stress can have a terrible impact on our well-being from a mental and a physical point of view. Stress and anxiety can cause headaches, digestive problems, and cause you to have trouble sleeping. Long-term stress can lead to depression and serious physical conditions like high blood pressure and heart disease. You must calm down. I cannot stress that enough. One thing that can make worrying worse is when we try to avoid it. Burying our head in the sand can be a common coping mechanism when we're stressed out about something, and I'm sure we've all done that at one time or another. Of course, this only makes the problem worse because it just sits there and festers in the back of our mind. Often we find that if we just get it together and start dealing with something, we already start to feel better.
I'm so broke, my nervous breakdown is on layaway.
The Five of Pentacles corresponds to the Taurus zodiac sign and to the planet Mercury.
We've moved on to the bull for this one. Taurus is another earth sign, so we get this idea of stability and practicality, but we also get a strong connection to material possessions, so it aligns quite closely with this card. The need for security is something that carries over from the last card, but here we see that taken to the opposite extreme. Mercury is the planet of communication and problem solving, so it can be taken as the approach we need to take during difficult times. Clear communication and a proactive mindset are essential when we're dealing with life's challenges. When we put the two together, I think we get an emphasis on the importance of confronting difficulties with practical strategies and seeking advice. Five of Pentacles notable people include German-born Empress of Russia, Catherine the Great, English novelist Charlotte Bronte, and American actor and wrestler John Cena.
The Five of Pentacles resides in the world of Asya and sits at the fifth Sephira of Geberah, on the pillar of severity.
So we're back at Geberah, but now we're in the realm of Asya. Now if we look at the other fives in the tarot, we can see that we're generally faced with situations of conflict or struggle, and this comes down to Geberah being the Sephira of severity. When we find that in the world of Asya, you can see why in this case that would lead to the kind of material troubles that we see in the card. Geberah sits in the middle of the left pillar of the Tree of Life and gives it its name, the Pillar of Severity. This is on the opposite side to the Pillar of Mercy that we talked about last time, and they both represent the opposing forces of the human experience. These two pillars are said to encompass masculine and feminine energy, which is seen as positive and negative. Now, I've talked before about how we don't mean that in the sense of good and bad, but rather more like the positive and negative terminals on a battery. The masculine is considered to be active and the feminine is thought of as receptive. So we get the father Sephira of Hokmar at the top of the Pillar of Mercy and the mother Sephira of Binar at the top of the Pillar of Severity. Now in the middle of each we get a Sephira of the opposing side, so that gives us Geberah or Severity on the feminine pillar and Hesed or Mercy on the masculine pillar. This is a little bit like the dots we see on the yin and yang symbols. In the Mystical Kabbalah by Dion Fortune, she writes, "It may be asked why such a male potency as Geberah should be placed in the feminine pillar. It must be remembered that Mars is a destructive potency, one of the infortunes in astrology. The positive builds up, the negative breaks down. The positive is a kinetic force, the negative is a static force."
The Five of Pentacles herb is mugwort. This herb has long been associated with magic and used to ward off evil spirits.
Did you hear about the evil spirit who got arrested? No? What happened? They got him for possession.
Your mother eats mugwort in hell.
But what does it all mean?
The Five of Pentacles is a card of poverty and destitution. As ever with the tarot, there are quite a few different ways of looking at that depending on the context. Waite says the card foretells material troubles above all, whether in the form illustrated, that is destitution, or otherwise. So on the surface, we've obviously got the physical aspects of that, and we can see that very clearly on the card. If this one shows up, it can be telling us that we need to be aware of some upcoming times of financial hardship. One of the most common readings for this one is that it's telling us to keep a tight grip on the purse strings. You know how when you're broke you suddenly turn into the most financially astute person ever, and you swear that you'll never buy spurious crap and be wasteful with money ever again. Then when things start to pick up, you're back on Amazon because you've now realised that what was missing from your life was a musical toilet roll holder and a pair of shoe umbrellas. Yes, that is an actual product. And so the cycle begins all over again. That's the material side of things, but we've also got this idea of spiritual hardship. We talked earlier about how the figures are walking straight past a church. Going through bad times can cause us to lose our connection to the things we believe in. Eden Gray says, "In outer darkness they have not yet realised the inner light." Feeling alone and lacking in friends and community is another aspect. Sometimes the card can be telling us to reach out to people, or maybe to swallow our pride and ask for help when we need it. Illness is another aspect, whether that's physical illness caused by not being able to afford treatment, or mental illness being brought about by all the worry and stress that the situation can cause. However, the card can also imply resilience in the face of difficulties, finding the courage to keep going when we feel like we've lost everything. Rachel Pollack says it implies a long-standing hardship. Observe that the people, though bent and crippled, are surviving. A common theme I've talked about here is losing faith. Whether that's in a spiritual sense, losing faith in others, or probably most importantly of all, losing the faith that things will ever get better. When we look back on our lives, we see that we seem to go through periods of expansion and contraction. This puts me in mind of the Wheel of Fortune card back at number 10 in the Trumps. When I made that video, I talked about how life is in a constant state of flux, and the wheel can be read as encouragement that things will inevitably get better. Also, there's the idea of learning from our hard times so that we can be better prepared in future. I included a quote from Paul Foster Case in that video that I'd like to read out again. He says, "Every effect is the consequence of preceding causes, and the better we grasp this law of sequence and cyclicity, the better our command over subsequent events. There is periodicity in everything." Finally, we've got a slightly unusual meaning for the card that Waite included in the Key to the Tarot. He says, for some cartomancists, this is a card of love and lovers, wife, husband, friend, mistress, also concordance, affinities. These alternatives cannot be harmonized. Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Waite, but Rachel Pollack has done a rather stellar job of harmonizing these alternatives. She says the card may indicate love, especially that of two people holding together in a bad situation. It may turn out that the hardship has become one of the major factors keeping them together.
It indicates that everything will be fine.
Oh, there you go then. Panic over. Anyone hoping for some respite when the Five of Pentacles appears reversed is going to be disappointed. Waite says reversed, disorder, chaos, ruin, discord, profligacy. So we're talking about things getting to the point of desolation here, and that can have different consequences depending on the circumstances. This puts me in mind of the Tower and the Ten of Swords. In those videos I talked about how we sometimes need to hit rock bottom before we can bounce back. A bad situation may be just bearable enough to prevent us from doing anything about it, but when it becomes intolerable, it can force us to make changes. Rachel Pollack says this suggests that the situation right side up has collapsed. The people are no longer surviving. While this immediate situation can seem much worse, it can sometimes lead to improvement.
In the reverse, this card announces that the disproportional mess between your savings and your spending will inevitably lead you to great inconvenience.
I think I must be drawing that reverse card all the time. The big takeaway for the Five of Pentacles is going through times of hardship and keeping the faith that things will get better with time if we keep going. If you're going through a period like this in your life, then please don't lose faith and don't be afraid to ask for help. Also, if you're aware of anyone who's on their own and having a bad time, maybe check in and see how they're doing. Sometimes all it takes is a bottle of wine and someone to share it with. Mother Teresa once said, "We think sometimes that poverty is only being hungry, naked and homeless. The poverty of being unwanted, unloved and uncared for is the greatest poverty. We must start in our own homes to remedy this kind of poverty."
Now this is what happens when you don't save for a rainy day. You end up flat broke and out on your arse. May the coming days bring you fortune and the resolve to hang on to it. Until next time.